I can imagine other kinds of critiques you might lobby at me, that what I'm teaching is no longer classics, which perhaps it is not, although I am still teaching Latin, that abandoning a canon is going to diminish the rigor or the perceived rigor of my program. I've thought about that. I have answers to that. That there is real intellectual excitement and joy in understanding the passive periphrastic or mastering a verb synopsis. I totally believe that that is true. And yet, I hope you will, at least for now, allow me to set these concerns to the side as well. All of which is to say that I'm really trying to focus more on who my students are and why they are in the room together and what we can productively do together in 10 weeks. I like sometimes to think of a college education as a backpack. And so my question for myself is always, what are they going to pick up from this class and put in that backpack? That doesn't necessarily exclude the canon, but I, given my constraints, am finding it harder and harder to believe that most students, after beating their head against the wall, say, of a Ciceronian period for 10 weeks, are really going to take much from that experience that is backpack worthy. So before I explain my current approach to course creation, I want to make clear what my commitments to equity look like. I'm guessing we all want to create classrooms that are open to all students, where all of them feel a sense of belonging and investment in the class. And yet I at least can point to numerous times when, even as I have been striving for that, I've failed, sometimes spectacularly. For me, the process of creating a more equitable space for students is ongoing, indeed a lifelong process, and I don't anticipate I will ever be done. So I want to share how I have been thinking about equity recently, understanding that there is so much excellent work out there to draw upon, as so many of you have shared today, and there is obviously more to come from all of these wonderful young scholars. I don't see what I'm doing as necessarily some kind of template, but as an approach that is currently resonating with me and helping me do better work. Laura Rendon's Sensi Pensante pedagogy is what I'm currently thinking with these days. And I like her reframing of what a teaching space can look like, because it not only encourages students to be themselves in that space, but because it also frees us to be more authentically present as well. And I would add, it also has a really explicit social justice aspect to it. Rendon frames her approach with what she calls privileged agreements governing the present pedagogical dream field. And she shows what these agreements lack. And I list them here. That is an agreement to privilege intellectualism at the expense of other kinds of inner knowing, the agreement of separation that separates faculty from students, an agreement of competition over collaboration, an agreement of perfection that leaves little room for error or imperfection, an agreement of privileging Western epistemologies, an agreement of busyness to the point of burnout, and of course, an agreement that discourages self-reflexivity. So what I want in my classroom is not that, right? I want a space that is going to include the full student in all of their aspects. I want to add in this other slide where Rendon talks about the difference between knowledge and wisdom, just because I think it offers us a good way of showing, like, I don't deny that I want my students to come away with actual knowledge from my classes, but that wisdom is that piece that I really feel is backpack worthy. So in essence, what I want my classroom space to be is a place where the threshold to get in is as low as possible. It doesn't require a step up to get in there, and it encourages students who are in to engage in that space, whoever they are. So I'm not looking for my ideal student or myself as a student. I want those people. Removing that step up for me is maybe a less elegant way of saying scaffolding, but it requires that any student coming out of a first-year Latin program can find success in that room. What kinds of things might be barriers to success? I think they are sometimes things that I just forget to take into account. For example, assumption of knowledge about Rome, the Republic, the Empire, its history, assumptions of knowledge about ancillary fields, religion, archaeology, philosophy, an overabundance of unfamiliar and technological terminology, assumptions of knowledge about US cultural norms, literature, anything associated with that. These kinds of assumptions can, of course, be ameliorated by teaching the requisite material. But here's another sneaky way that inequity works. That student with cultural capital and prior knowledge can, to some extent, coast, earning that easy A, while my other students productively struggle. So the student who comes in with the 5 on the AP exam, for example, when I'm teaching Virgil. There are solutions to this too, but easiest is perhaps to teach something that is just unknown territory for everyone. This, of course, requires knowing my students, or at minimum, not making assumptions about who is going to walk into that room. Of course, I used to try to do this all the time, to find materials and approaches that would engage students' interest, even as we work to improve our language skills. But when I was tethered to the canon, I was not able to make what I think now are the best possible choices for my students. In the past few years, I have taught a couple of pretty traditional courses in pretty traditional ways, Catullus, Roman Elegy, but increasingly my courses are topics courses, and that I think will appeal to students where they have a toehold right from the start, and where not only the texts, but the topics will be largely new to all of them as a topic of scholarly inquiry, and where we can productively improve our language skills. These include the Aulus Gellius by request story. Request course, a course on Latin of colonial and post-colonial Mexico, a course on honeybees in Latin literature and modern life, magic, astrology, and the supernatural, and Latin fairy tales, which is my course that I'll talk about today. All of these courses share some basic features. Almost all students have a passing familiarity with the topic, but little expertise, especially as it pertains to Latin speaking and writing world. Granted, this might be knowing what a honeybee looks like or an acknowledgement that Mexico was colonized, but that is pretty much all they need to know at the beginning to get into that room. All students have knowledge to contribute to our study. This might be specialist knowledge from my biology students who know insect anatomy. This might be firsthand knowledge of Mexican culture. It might be knowledge of the best astrology app. But the topics themselves, I try to create as capaciously as possible so that students can bring themselves into this material. The topics are all inter or multi or cross-disciplinary. For almost all of them, I have guest lectures, collaborative sessions with other courses, and experiential components. Where possible, I have other students visit the class to share knowledge. In fact, sometimes to have, at best possible, to have students teaching my students.